evening and welcome. It can be said of my very special guest tonight that he's lived a full and varied life. He has, in order of ascending merit, been a shoplifter, bootlegger, organizer of indoor pony races, gambler, hellraiser, man about town, raconteur, soldier, Oscar-winning film star and writer. Once upon a time, believe it or not, he was put up for auction. There were no takers. All this, and he's still only 21. Ladies and gentlemen, David Niven. David, welcome. As I said in my introduction, I can hardly believe it. You were once put up for auction, there were no takers. How did that occur?
Well, that was a long time ago in New York, and I was broke, and I was selling booze for some ex-bootleggers. And there was an old sort of society hostess lady called Elsa Maxwell, who was famous in those days. She gave these great big parties and things. And I tried to sell her some booze, and she said, this is not a good thing. You should marry a rich wife. So I said, well, how do I do that on $40 a week, which is what I'm getting from the booze people? So she said, well, I tell you what. She said, I'm running a thing for the Milk Fund, which is a big charity. And it was a big dance. She said, I want you to be one of the professional dance partners. And you and people like Jock Whitney, he became ambassador to Great Britain, didn't he?
Right.
And those sort of people. And she said, you wear a green carnation and charge $20 a dance. Well, I made about $40, I think, for the fund. And then an awful thing happened. They wheeled on a sort of imitation section of the New York Stock Exchange. And they had votes. And people bought shares for the most popular man in New York. Now, they had all these names of all these people they all knew, like the Jock Whitneys and all these people. And at the bottom was David Nevins, Nevins, I don't know. And they thought I was the man who'd made the microphone or something. And nobody bought anything, And it was the most awful day of my life. And you saw these ticker things going on, and thousands of dollars going against everybody else, and poor David Nevins at the bottom.
That must have been soul-destroying.
Awful.
Terrible. I bet it's the first time you've become bottom of the league in any state for women, though, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. Often.
Don't be modest. But I mean, that was a sort of an out-and-out attempt, I suppose, to sort of pair you off with somebody in New York at the time when you were, in fact, single. But how did you manage in that period, before you were a film star, for a feminine company in New York? I mean, you have this reputation, or had this reputation of being the sort of man about town and gay persuader of ladies and this sort of thing. Did you have a hard time with them generally there?
Well, I think it's always a hard time to get the real goodies, But no, New York was all right. There were lots of young people broke too, and it worked out pretty nicely, I think.
Any sort of spectacular mishaps there?
Well, there was one. There was one. I was visiting some people in Greenwich, Connecticut, and somebody took me skating, which I'd never done before. So I had a cushion strapped on my bottom, and it had an Indian's head on it. Remember that? And I was crashing around this ice, and there was a very, very beautiful girl doing figures of 8 round an orange. And I got out of control, and I cut the orange in half and knocked her over. and I picked her up again, and I got her telephone number and name, and her name, I remember to this day, was B. Hudson. She said that her father was a doctor, and they lived at 850 Park Avenue, or something like that. So I said, could I call her up? And I came to New York, the booze salesman. And she said yes, so I got to New York, and I couldn't remember the address, and I looked into the thing, and I saw D. Hudson, which is, she said the father's name, lawyer or something. Anyway, and I called the number, and I said, can I speak to Miss Hudson? And the voice said, this is she, So I said, well, I'm the man that cut your orange in half, She said, what are you talking about? I said, didn't you remember? I had a cushion on my behind. And so she said, anyway, I got the whole thing wrong, and it was not the one I thought at all. Now, you've got to believe this, Michael. It's completely true that there was, by some miracle, it was another girl called B. Hudson. And she said, well, the thing is that the number you called is my husband's number, and he's a lawyer, and this is 650 Park Avenue, and the one you thought you were calling was a doctor, and he's 850 Park Avenue. You got it all wrong. So I said, well, how's the husband? And she said, well, he's fine. And I said, well, where's he work? And she said, he works downtown. And I said, a long way downtown? She said, what do you, and I said, well, I tell you what, why don't you leave him downtown and come and have lunch with me. Now, you know, it's easy to be brave on the end of a telephone, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
So she said, I never heard nonsense in my life, but the very fact she didn't hang up, I knew that, you know, something. So anyway, I pressed on, and I was brave, and I said, well, come on. I said, none of you American women, middle-aged ladies, you've got no guts. Middle-aged, I'm 22, which is, you know, then you know. So I said, she said, well, you might be a burglar, you might be a kidnapper, you might be a murderer, you might be anything. So I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will wear a blue and white spotted scarf and a red carnation, and I will stand on any street corner you name at 1 o'clock. Then you can drive by, you can walk by, and if you like the look of the thing you see on the corner, then we have lunch way uptown, away from this horrible husband, you see. So I went, and she gave me an address, and it was right outside the Bankers Trust Company, a big bank. And I bought a bunch of roses, you know. And it was 14 degrees below zero, and the roses started to go black, and I'm freezing to death. I'm standing on the thing, it was 1 o'clock, it was 1:30, 1:45, and finally, about 2 o'clock, a very attractive girl went by, and she said, hello, Mr. Niven, and I said, hello. And she went straight past, like this, and then another one came from this way and said, hello, Mr. Niven. Another one went past, then 3 more, Mr. Niven, you know, and they went by in taxis, and this girl had called up all her chums, you know. And the final achievement was a singing group from Western Union. And I'm there, and sort of, happy lunchtime to you for these brutes.
Enough to put you off women for life.
I finally met her, and she was divine, but I didn't that day.
No. Can I ask you, going back before that time, what was your introduction to the fair sex, David?
Do we get bleeped on this program?
No, we don't get bleeped. You may speak freely.
Well, I know what you're getting at, Mike. Well, if you can take the beeps. Anyway, I was sort of almost 15. It's my excuse, anyway. And we lived in London, and there wasn't room for me in this small house. So I was farmed out into a room up at St. James's Place somewhere. We lived in Sloane Street. And so every night after dinner, this creepy stepfather I had used to give me tuppence for the bus, number 19 and number or 22 or 30, I remember those up Sloane Street. And I used to get off at the Ritz Hotel and walk down into my ghastly burrow with a pot under the bed and all that. So, and I got more adventurous, and I used to walk further on up to Piccadilly and look at all the lights, you know, the Bovril and Albridge's Lung Tonic and all those lovely things. And then I realized that lots of girls were walking about, you know, at the same time. So then I once saw a spectacular pair of legs, and I followed this girl just to look at her. And she seemed to have an awful lot of men friends, you know, she would talk to people. And so I went to my room, and I kept on thinking about this girl. I read it. The next night, I couldn't wait to get up to Piccadilly again, and I walked around, and I couldn't find her. And finally I did, and I saw her with a very nice-looking man. I thought it was her father, man in a dinner jacket, and she took him into this little house in Cork Street. And I hid and waited to see if she ever came out again. She did, came out quite soon, as a matter of fact. So anyway, after that, I really thought of this girl all the time. And I used to go looking for her at night. And one night, she suddenly turned on me. And she was a lovely cockney. She said, what do you want? Do you want a piece, mate? What are you doing, you know? What was she talking about? I said, do you want to come home with me? And I said, yes. So I thought, I'm taking this dream, took me into this flat. And I thought this is going to be the ginger beer and the gramophone record, you know.
A likely story.
Yeah, and then she said, then she gave me this ghastly book of photographs and said, look, if you have any trouble, take a look at these first. And so I 15. And then she appeared with, you know, the usual thing, the sort of pink shoes and nothing else, and I'm gibbering. I was just gibbering. So she said, well, right, you can wash over there, dear. And there was a little terrible sort of kidney-shaped table full of blue fluid, you know. So I didn't. I washed my hands. I didn't know. No bleach.
I think it's a marvellous introduction to fair sex. I tell you what, it beats sex education films, doesn't it?
Well, yes.
It really does. Yeah, and then I know reading your book too that you became so very fond of her, didn't you? And she was.
It's true. I really did. It sounds corny and odd, but I think I fell in love with her very much. And she used to come down and see me at school. And and she'd never seen the country before. She came from Hoxton, never seen the country. She used to arrive with this ghastly tartan rug and potted shrimp sandwiches. Oh dear. Well, thank God for the rug anyway.
Did she ever meet any of them? I mean, it must have been a bit dangerous going to school. I mean, you were at boarding school at the time.
I was at Stowe. And it had this marvellous headmaster called Roxburgh. And the cricket match was on, and she was really a dish, a real beauty. Lovely girl. And Roxburgh came over, saw me sitting on the rug with this girl watching the cricket. And, it was agony. And he said, may I join you? And I said, oh, sir, please, and this is, Miss, I won't give the name even now. So she said, well, you don't look a bit like a schoolmaster, do you, dear, Anyway, and he knew.
Yeah. Did you, David, at that time, do you have any hint, any ambition of wanting to become an actor at all?
No, absolutely none. Well, that's not true. I mean, I did the inevitable. I'm sorry about this voice. I had none at all this morning, and it's going to go in a minute.
Is it?
Well, I had a fascinating and wonderful specialist today who put things right down to bits of bicycle down to here. I made no noise at all this morning. Yeah. No, it's very wobbly. I'm sorry, but we're doing my best. Yeah. No, amateur night. I used to do amateur things at school, I think, and then later at Sandhurst I did some concerts. Or something.
Why Sandhurst? Because looking through your career, it seems. I mean, you're not a man who's taken anything very seriously at all, or you give this appearance throughout life. And therefore, a kind of military training, military career, seems very much at odds with what you're about. Was it the loony aspect of the army that appealed to you?
Well, first of all, I put in the army because we had no money. And my father was killed in the First War, so her ambition, obviously, was to get me off the books as quick as possible. So that was the best way to do it. And I hacked through Sandhurst. I enjoyed that. It was very tough in those days, and I think it probably still is. And then I was stationed in Malta. I was in the Highland Regiment in Malta.
What was that like?
Oh, Malta was awful. And I hope there are no Maltese listening tonight. They're sweet people, but they're not mad about their island, And there were in those days, we had the huge Mediterranean fleet there. And just one miserable little battalion. So when they went away, we had to guard the place and look after it and everything. It was funny. A lot of it was very funny, I thought. And we got 2 months leave a year. We got no money. We got nine as a young officer, you got 9 shillings and 6pence a day. And you had to buy, you were told what to buy, and the uniform cost 250 quid. And the government gave you 50, and that's all you got. And it was quite mad.
What was the social life like as a young officer? Was it, did it have its moments?
Pretty powerful, really, yes. Yes.
Powerful is a good word. You care to expand on powerful?
What?
Would you care to expand on powerful?
Well, you see, and this, first of all, on the island, it sounds so awful. It makes me rather cared, doesn't it? But there was thousands of girls, because there were, first of all, I don't know how many thousand naval officers and wives there, and wives of all sorts of other people. Then there was the fishing fleet that came out. The fishing fleet with the sort of passed over Debs and spotty sort of country cousins who came out trying to grab these poor sailors that came sex-starved back from 3 months on the Greek islands or somewhere, trying to get husbands. And then all sorts of assorted mid-European ladies who worked down in the gut, the strata strata. I mean, of the highest class type ladies, but working this ghastly trade down there. And when the fleet went away, there were 24 of us, you see.
It was here also, too, wasn't it, that you met this character who's appeared in so many of your films, in Trubshaw. It's hard to believe, David, that you kept dropping his name in films and things, that Trubshaw was real and existed. Indeed he did, didn't he?
Oh, indeed he does, too, very much so. Trubshaw is my best man. I mean, he's been my best man twice. He's been married twice. He's been my best man both times. And best friend. I mean, there he is, and he's huge. He's 6'6" and has a moustache you can see from the back on a clear day. And he was the first one, to grow long before Jimmy Edwards was ever thought of. He had a thing out to there. Fascinating character, Trubshaw. I used to put his name, when I got into the movies, I used to put his name into every one if I could, to sort of send a signal to Trubshaw back from Hollywood that I was still there and thinking of him, you know. But people got to catch on. And I was doing, with Larry Olivier, we were doing Wuthering Heights. And William Wyler was the director, and he said, "Now, David, Trubshaw's name does not come into the Bronte script. We don't have any of this." and he was listening, he was really watching, and I was determined to get it in. And finally, I suppose it was Kathy unleashed these two great dogs on Heathcliff, which was Larry. And I had to defend him. I said, "Down, obviously down, Trubshaw, down." I got it in. And then that was cut, and they got that out. They had that taken away. And the only thing I could do, and I got it in, I talked to the prop man, and when Merle Oberon and I were being married in the movie, and walking through the village churchyard, there was, "Here lies my faithful friend Michael Trubshaw."
That was what was interesting about that film, of course, was it was one of those sort of few sort of heavy roles you've done, wasn't it? You know, I mean, you made your name certainly.
Well, it's a ghastly role. It's the world's famous awful part, Edgar.
Edgar, that's
in Wuthering Heights. That's the part that actors avoid if they're starving. You know, it's the most awful part. Oh God! And I was under contract to Sam Goldwyn and delighted in doing anything I was told to do. He told me to do that, and I read it, and I said, "Not even me, I can't do that. No way." No. So he put me on suspension at once, and then William Wyler, the greatest director in the game then, came to see me, this miserable little actor, and said, "David, you know, you're the only man who can give..." Well, this is gibberish, but I fell for it, you see, fool. And then I found myself in this ghastly outfit, and there was a ardent, devout poor fool who had invented the clothes, and he made absolutely no room for anything down here, you know. And I came on the set the first day, and I said, "David, would you please go?" And it's ridiculous, and I had to go and change. And this part called for me to cry. And I read the script that day, and it said, "Edgar, me, breaks down at foot of bed and sobs." Now, Kathy, this is Merle, lying dead in the bed, and Olivier's circling purposely around with a log or something, you know. And Hugh Williams and Flora Ropes and all these great experts, and I had to weep. And I said, "But Willie, I don't know how to weep." He said, "Speak up." I said, I can't cry, Willie." He said, "Loud." I said, "I can't cry." He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, you've all heard it. Here's an actor who says he can't act. Cry." Oh, yes, oh, yes. And then I did, I tried, and everybody laughed. And Wilder said, "Well, can you make a crying face?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." So he said, "All right, we'll give him the blower." And I get the menthol in the eyes. And he said, "Turn the camera," and I bend over the corpse, and Merle's lying there dead in the bed, and Larry at the log. And I made my crying face, and they gave me the thing, "Turn the camera," and he said, "Now squeeze, squeeze," and I did this. And a terrible thing happened. And instead of tears coming out of my eyes, green slime. Really awful.
Oh, what a pity it wasn't in colour, that film. It wasn't, was it? Yeah. But going back before that, David, because if you've come on you've cut out sort of a huge chunk there, which was the time when you first came to Hollywood and sort of got under contract to Goldwyn. What was it like in those days? I mean, Hollywood was in its prime then, wasn't it? Thousands
absolutely,
of actors
yes.
in the great boom city. How did you first get in there, get into...
Michael, I'm basically opposed to elderly actors reminiscing about their past. If you can stand it,
Well, certainly.
Only because those days of Hollywood certainly were the great days. I mean, between 1930 and 1960, and I had the great luck and good fortune to be there the whole time, except for the 6.5 years in the war. And there were, take the middle of that, the mid-40s, 800 million people a week all over the world bought tickets to go to the movies. Last year, 120 million bought tickets. Of course, there was no competition then. There was no night baseball, no bingo, and indeed no television, you know. So they had it all to themselves, and they built up these fabulous stars through the star system. And when I started there, I worked in 27 westerns as an extra with this voice, and I wasn't allowed to speak, obviously. So I was silent, doing Mexicans and things. And I used to work at MGM Studios, and that one studio, Michael, at the same time had, under contract, among others, Garbo, Gable, Joan Crawford, Jean Harlow, John Barrymore, Lionel Barrymore, Norma Shearer, Hedy Lamarr, William Powell, Myrna Loy, W.C. Fields, Wallace Beery, Mary Dresler, and the Marx Brothers. Then they had, this one studio, then they had sort of second echelon people doing less important pictures like Robert Montgomery, Robert Young, Frank Morgan, those people. Then the same studio had in the children's school learning acting in front of a camera, the children who did their school lessons so many hours a day by California law, 2 hours or something, in little canvas boxes on the sound stages. Elizabeth Taylor, Mickey Rooney, Ava Gardner, Lana Turner, and Judy Garland. One studio.
Fantastic.
And they built these characters up, and the same, then at other studios would have Fred Astaire at RKO, and Ginger Rogers and Cary Grant, Carol Lombard. Paramount had Dietrich Boyer, Gary Cooper, that sort of thing. And the public really made gods and goddesses of those people.
Yes. Were they in fact real people, though, David?
Oh, yes, they were marvelous people.
They were
very superior people, wonderful people.
Superior people?
Yes.
Really?
I mean, when I don't mean superior snob way.
No.
I mean, they were great human beings and very unjealous people.
Yes. One finds it difficult to believe that, you know, when one reads about the processing that went on. You know, the publicity machine that projected them. One finds it difficult to believe that they could ever sort of live up to that kind of glamour and that kind of...
I think they had an awful time, because when the public really identified itself, they saw in those people what they would really love to be. This is true, I think, and they saw their ideas of courage and cowardice and good looks and all that. But they also had a terrible wish to see the script come full circle, so that if, as in the normal course of events, they got older and other people took their places, or they had terrible home lives, or they had illnesses, or indeed committed suicide, which a tragic number did, the public sort of said, well, it had to happen. That's right. That's correct. You know, it was very strange.
What about the most unbelievable film star of the lot, though, David Garbo? Because you knew her quite well, didn't you?
Yes.
I mean, was she really, I want to be alone all the time?
Oh, no question. She's terribly shy.
Really?
And my wife is Swedish, and we got to know her very well. And her terribly shy. And really wanted no part of anything else except keeping herself in. And for instance, in our own house, she went there many, many times. And one day I said to her, oh, look, we have a Swedish cook at the time, or somebody was Swedish in the house. Will you sign something for her? No, wouldn't do it. But it's a genuine...
Shy in that sense, and yet, reading your book, she wasn't averse to taking her clothes off and going on a skinny dip.
Oh, no, the first naked woman that my two small sons ever saw was Garbo in our swimming pool.
Really?
And I had a look too, but did lovely.
David, what about, when one thinks of that period as well, you mentioned MGM. You were under contract, of course, so possibly the most extraordinary character even Hollywood invented, which was Samuel Goldwyn. What was he like? How do you find him?
Well, he was, the greatest, I think, because he started the whole business anyway. And he was the only producer in the whole world, I think, who put his own money into the pictures. Those huge Goldwyn pictures, he never went to the bank. He put his own money in. He used to say the banks can't afford me, he said, you know. And I was under contract to him for 15 years. And his name wasn't originally Goldwyn at all.
No?
And that was Goldfish. And, true. And Sam arrived from Poland, because all those fellows who started the Dream Factory, oddly enough, they were all, practically without exception, from the ghettos of Europe. L.B. Mayer and Goldwyn, who started Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, came from, Sam from Poland, Mayer from Russia. Zukor, who started Paramount, came from Hungary. Carl Laemmle, who started Universal, came from Germany. And Louis Selznick, who had a finger in every pie, came also from Russia. But Sam arrived with an unpronounceable Polish name in New York, and he was about 15 years old. And the Irish immigration man said, don't forget it, Goldfish. And he called him Sam Goldfish, and he entered America, as this is true, as Goldfish. And later on, he sold gloves for a bit, and then he became interested in the infant movie business. And he teamed up with a young Canadian writer called Cecil B. DeMille. And he got $20,000 together and dispatched DeMille to make a movie at a place called Flagstaff, Arizona, in the desert, called The Squaw Man. It was the first picture. And it rained for 18 days in Flagstaff, and DeMille panicked and disappeared and sent a cable to Sam saying, I've just rented a hut in the middle of an orange field in a village called Hollywood. And that really was the start. And Goldwyn went out there, met a man called, it's nearly over this long dull story, met a man called Archie Selwyn, and they formed a company, Archie Selwyn and Sam Goldfish, and unbelievably, they took two halves of their name and they called it the Selfish Company. And unbelievable. And then wiser counsels prevailed, and they took the other halves and called it the Goldwyn Company, and Sam, with a piece of massive commercial treachery, nipped off and changed his own name to Goldwyn. And poor Archie Selwyn was left out in the car.
That's absolutely astonishing.
Astonishing man. Great producer.
And what about the Goldwynisms? I mean, were they true
Well,
or were they manufactured?
I mean, there are a lot of them. You know, one heard about Include Me Out and
Yes.
I'll tell you in 2 words, impossible, and we've all passed a lot of water since those days, you know, that sort of thing. But I actually, honestly, only heard him pull one big one when I was there the whole time.
What was that? Do you remember?
I do indeed, but it's rather an American joke. I hope our friends won't...
No.
Well, quick, anyway. Field Marshal Montgomery came out for something just after the war to do with NATO. And he was doing something in San Diego with the American Navy. And Sam Goldwyn gave a party for him and invited 40 carefully selected people from Hollywood. And I found myself at a table of 4 with Field Marshal Montgomery sitting there and Frances Goldwyn, Sam's wife, there, and Gary Cooper's wife there. And Goldwyn got a bit nervous because the Field Marshal, and the only time he perked up at all was when somebody said shooting tomorrow, and he thought it was, you know. so Francis flashed Sam to make a speech, to say something, and Goldwyn tapped his glass and got up, and I heard him say behind me, he had a funny voice right back, he said, "It gives me great pleasure to introduce to Hollywood Marshall Field Montgomery." This is, for those who don't know, the biggest store. It's like Harrods, isn't it?
Yes, right.
And so Jack Warner, and Francis Goldwyn looked like she'd been hit with a halibut. You know? And Jack Warner, without a moment's hesitation, said, "Montgomery Ward, you mean?" Which is another one. But anyway, that was the only time I ever heard him pull one.
What about the processing, though, that went on with you, David, and that? I mean, when Goldwyn put you under contract, what happened to you then when the publicity boys got hold of you?
Well, for instance, they had this sort of questionnaire thing. They asked you, who was your mother? And I said she was French. He said, "That's great, and we can use that." You know? They said, "What about your father?" And I said, "Well, he was killed in the Dardanelles when I was 4. And great! I said, "Well, thanks so much." So he said, what rank? And I said, he was a lieutenant. No good at all. And they made him a general. And I was always the son of the famous Scottish general, you know. Poor father.
And also, they made you an assistant, didn't they? Goldwyn insisted that you went out on the boards for a while, went out and got some stage experience.
He did indeed. He said, "Now go and get some experience," because he only had 4 people under contract at any one time. And he had me for nothing, obviously, and he had Gary Cooper and Ronald Coleman and somebody else. I've forgotten. Oh, yes, a Russian actress called Anna Sten. And so he packed me off, and I went to one of those theaters they had in those days. Because they used to bring a few people out from New York, from the theater. And it was 20 hours by air anyway, and flying at 5,000 feet through all that muck and hitting mountains and everything. Or 4 days on a train to get there from New York. So you had to do it right there as an extra, and all the extras were would-be stars. And I enlisted in one of those strange theaters where the actors worked after in the night, hoping that scouts would come round from the studios and see them. And I went to the Pasadena Playhouse, which is a very smart one, I think. And I got a job in a play called Wedding. And I was one of 62 guests in the thing. And I shared a dressing room with a maniac who's now a dentist in Omaha, quite rightly. And he found a whiskey called Mr. the Moor's Scotch, which was made in Burbank, just around the corner. Anyway, varnish remover it was. And I didn't worry a bit. I had nothing to do. I came on, as the curtain went up, I came on with a big bowl of punch for the guests, you know, and put it on a table and went off. Now, second act, I had to recognize another guest, and I came on and went, my second act. Then the third act was my big deal. I had to snatch a conversation with this fellow. And I had to say, Michael, on my dying oath, this is true, I had to say, "Well, I tell you the King of Siam does." I swear. And he had to look at me and say, "Well, I know the King of Siam, and I tell you he doesn't." And I had to say, "Oh." And we go off, that was my partner. So now, for the opening night, I told people, I lied a bit. I went around saying, Well, I'm playing with an interesting girl over at the Playhouse this week. I think she gets the right breaks, you know. Be all right. Always. So the word went round that I was a great big star. And I went downstairs in my dressing room, this fool with this bottle of Mr. the Moors, and telegrams arriving from people I'd now met. Good luck, the first 30 years of the hardest Clark Gable. I've got them to this day, you know. I thought something had gone wrong. So I had a few belts at the Mist. And went upstairs with my bowl of punch and came on to a thunderous hand. I did the full unforgivable. I put the thing and I looked down to see who was there. And Herbert Marshall, who was a big star that day, had brought a surprise party of 30 big stars, Gloria Swanson, Charles Lawton, Charles Boyer, all out there to see me and my big star thing. And I panicked and tottered off the stage with the bowl of punch, thereby screwing up the play entirely, because underneath it was a note for the leading lady. I don't know. Went downstairs. I said, God, give me some mist. And he gave me a great umbrella stand of mist. So then I came up again, and I thought, they mustn't see me, you know? And this time, I ran across the stage like this. Now, the third act, and we'd had a lot of mist by now, and I was brave, and I didn't mind, and I took this poor man by the arm. I said, now, look, I don't want to impose my rather strong personality on your very dull brain. But I have it right from the horse's mouth. I have it on the very finest authority that the King of Siam does. And he said, Jesus. And that was it. And the man, that Mr. Gilmore Brown, only sit out of my theatre, both of you, first night.
Really?
Yes.
You went,
Mist and all.
you went back to the stage again later on, didn't you, when you were a star, in fact, and you...
I can go back. Oh, yeah, to the stage after that. Yes, I see what you mean. Yes.
Yes, with was it Nana you did?
Oh, Nina.
Nina. Yes. With somebody was in the audience that night.
God, I thought you said in the audience now. I nearly fainted.
No, Gloria Swanson.
Yeah, yes.
That was a fairly...
That's right. She was there.
Traumatic experience.
That was ghastly.
Yeah.
It was ghastly. It was quite a good play in French. It was pretty bloody awful the way we did it in English. I know that. And we did it, there were three of us in the play. Gloria, who played my mistress, and Alan Webb, who played her husband. He's a wonderful actor. And it was all just the three people. And we opened, you know, in Connecticut, Hartford and Boston and those places. Then we opened on Broadway, and I'd never done this in my life. Oh, don't. And Swanson had a theory that actors should always have something else to do except act. She's very right. And she said, so she had a clothing company on the side called the Pilgrim Corset Corporation, or something like the Pilgrim. And she had a clause in her contract that this company should design the clothes that she wore in this play, and they were pretty grisly garments, I can tell you, they're awful. Anyway, she looked frightening. And she wore some pretty funny things out of town, but when we came to Broadway, Alan Webb and I played the first sort of explanatory scene, and he's the husband, he hid behind the curtain, and the bell rings, and it's my mistress coming, and I've been rehearsing how I'm going to get rid of her or something. In she comes, and she had to fling herself into my arms, you know. And I'm pretty nervous, because there's Rex Harrison, my old chum, and Tallulah Bankhead, and all these people, everybody, opening night. And in came Swanson in a sort of black taffeta tent. And she's very tiny, she comes up to about here, you know, and her head's sticking out the top of this tent. And she flung herself into my arms, and I was so frightened and unnerved by the whole thing that I grabbed her and tried to smile. And my lip was so dry that it got stuck about my teeth. And I got this, and I squeezed too hard in the opening clinch, and there was suddenly a loud report and a sort of twanging noise, and out of her chest came 4.5 inches of white whalebone. Right up and down there. Absolutely. In case you don't believe me, to prove to you this is true, I've still got the review that Walter Kerr wrote, who was the Herald Tribune man. We understood from the program that Miss Swanson designed her own clothes. Like the play, they fell apart in the first act.
You framed that one, did you? What about the reviews of your own work, David?
I've only actually got one. I haven't got that one anymore. But
what's that?
The first one I ever got was from the Detroit Free Press in a Goldwyn picture called Splendor. And it said, In this picture, we were privileged to see Mr. Samuel Goldwyn's latest discovery. All we can say about this actor, question mark, is that he is tall, dark, and not the slightest bit handsome.
That would have been awful receiving that.
Couldn't get much worse.
Absolutely terrible. David, of all the, you mentioned there, Gloria Swanson, of all the leading ladies that you worked with, which did you enjoy most of all, do you think? Which was the one who gave you most pleasure working with?
Oh, without question, Deborah Carr, without question.
Really? Oh, I interviewed her recently.
Oh, she's such a sensational person to work with. She's a marvelous human being anyway, utterly generous to work with, and such fun. A ghastly giggler. That's the only thing. She giggles a great deal.
Really?
Oh. But she's yes, that dream to work with. Any actor who works with her should be on his knees.
Yes.
The biggest male giggler, I'll give you 1,000 guesses, you'll never get it, is Marlon Brando.
Oh, that's unbelievable.
I did a picture of him. We were playing two crooks. And every day we had to work together. And he's such a fearful giggler, and I'm pretty bad, that in the end, we played whole scenes looking at the tops of each other's heads, you know. Lovely man.
Also at the time, too, when you were in Hollywood, apart from actors, actresses, producers, directors, there were one or two extraordinary writing talents around there, too, weren't there? When,
oh, yes.
Scott Fitzgerald, in fact, he worked in Hollywood for a time. They all did this, didn't they?
Goldwyn had him. Goldwyn had Scott Fitzgerald under contract, and he had Robert Sherwood at the same time.
Yes.
In fact, Scott Fitzgerald was fired by Goldwyn for a line he wrote in a movie that I was in.
Really?
We were doing raffles just before the war, and Scott was there. And he was on the source a good bit, you know, by that time. Yeah. And he had to polish up the dialogue of raffles. I remember it well. I had to say to Olivia de Havilland, who was the leading lady, I had to say, part your lips, smile. She did this, and I said, who is your dentist? You know, and Scott was fired. He was thrown out.
Really?
Yeah.
He was a tragic figure, wasn't he? What a talent. The fancy sort of wasting it all away there.
Terrible talent, great talent.
Talking about being on the source, you had a period there, didn't you, with Errol Flynn, where was it Cirrhosis by the Sea you used to live at and this sort of thing? Yeah.
Cirrhosis by the was,
yeah.
Yes. The name of the house.
Yes. You were, what kind of public reaction was there to the life that you and Flynn led? I mean, did you ever have sort of a clean up Flynn and Niven campaign?
Well, there was one woman.
Really?
Oh, God, was there not? There was a woman in New York who decided to clean up Hollywood. And to start with Errol and I, we lived in a house, we had shared this house for 18 months together. That she was going to come out and going to start in on us, you know, clean us up. And of course, it was a snowball. She came out by train, took 4 days, and giving interviews at every bus stop. By the time she arrived at the Union Station in Los Angeles, it was astronomical. So the studio put us on a boat and said, get out of the whole place. You know? Yeah. It was really very ugly indeed. Yeah. But poor Errol, I mean, he was put in jail. No, he wasn't put in jail. He was sued and summoned and sued for statutory rape, you know, which is absolutely unfair because the girl, I remember the girl, and she can sue me if she likes. And her name was Slatterly, something Slatterly. I remember her often around the place then. And she was, I swear to you, I thought she had to be at 22, 23. And Flynn took her on his boat. And then she said she'd been raped. And he was staggered. I wasn't there. I was back in England by that time. He was staggered that this had happened. And at the trial, she showed up with no makeup, pigtails, and bobby socks, you know? And she was actually, apparently, but just under the age, or whatever it was. And he very nearly went to the box for years. Yes.
Well, I suppose at this time that the studio was sort of was looking after you all the time. Anything like this, it sort of closed ranks and...
Well, it did, you see, because if take Clark Gable, for instance, not that he ever needed the ranks closed, but he was the king of Metro-Goldwyn, which was the great studio, the biggest. And to make sure that Clark really never made a bad picture, they had, I well remember it, they had 6 or 7 top writers who had nothing to do except find, polish, and perfect the perfect vehicle for Gable's talent as a personality, really. Yes. So that every Gable picture was an awfully good Gable picture, and everyone made so many $1 million, you know. Yes. So they had to protect these creatures. Yes. Not these creatures, he was a great man, but...
Yes. Yes. What about the other thing, too, about Hollywood, David? I mean, was there, to your knowledge, not that you ever lay on it, but was there a casting couch as such?
I think there certainly was, you know, but I think very much in the lower echelon. I don't think that anybody like David Selznick or Goldwyn was ever shoving actresses down on the casting couch. I really don't think for 1 minute. But I'm quite sure that wretched girls who were trying to get started would assist the assistants, you know, if there was any chance of helping things along. But that did go on. And also, don't forget that outside central casting, when I was an extra, there was a big sign up saying, don't try and become an actor. For every one we employ, we turn away 2,000. So the competition was frightening and ferocious. Yeah. And these girls, any girl that won a beauty contest anywhere in the world, sooner or later would arrive with a one-way ticket to Hollywood. And they were working in the shops and the car hops and in brothels, and it was really pathetic.
Yes. Of course, I mean, you yourself, in your book, you outlined several ploys that you had about getting to the notice of producers and things, Zanuck and people like that. I mean, you even went to the extreme once of playing polo, didn't you, with Zanuck?
Well, yes, but that was quite by mistake, because I mean, the whole thing of Hollywood for people like me was to sit out the broke periods and keep going by working in fishing boats, which I did, and that sort of thing, until you got a break. And you never knew where they were coming from, and often they didn't lead to anything. But I was standing outside the casting office, United Artists Studios, and Douglas Fairbanks Sr., the great Douglas, drove through the gates. And he was a wonderful man, but he couldn't remember to put the right names to the right face. And he thought I, standing in line with a lot of extras, was a golfer called Bobby Sweeney, who once won the amateur championship here in America. And he thought I was Bobby Sweeney, and he said, hi, and I'd come on in. And I was taken out of the line and got in his car, and thought, oh. So then I had to tell him that I wasn't Bobby Sweeney. So he said, well, and he was wonderful. He said, oh, well, he said, come and have a steam. Well, the last thing in the world I wanted was a Turkish bath. I wanted a nice hot lunch, you know. So he took me into this steam room, and it's a scene from a movie. I found myself stark naked on a marble slab with Douglas Fairbanks, and I'm an extra. Sam Goldwyn, Joe Skenk, who was the head of 20th Century Fox, Darryl Zanuck, who had a lot of teeth, and Bob Benchley described him as the only man in the world who could eat an apple through a tennis racket. and Darryl Zanuck, and oh yes, and Aidan Rourke, who was a 10 handicap polo player who looked after Zanuck's ponies and did some reading for him, and a man called Sam the Barber, that's right. And I'm fainting through lack of food and the heat and everything, but hoping that somehow somebody would put me in a movie. I couldn't think, well. And Fairbanks had a wild sense of humor, and he said, he knew I was broke, but I told him, he said, oh, Niven, what are you going to do this winter? You're going to play polo or bring the yacht round? Yacht, I had $4, you know, so I said, polo, and was carried out by Sam the Barber, who threw me into this plunge, ice-cold plunge. When I came to, Zanuck was bending over me and saying, you know, did be careful, does he really play polo? And I heard Fairbanks saying, yeah, he played for the British Army. Played for the British Army. So anyway, I thought it was a way in, and so Zanuck said, would you come and play with my group on Sunday? So I said, and Aidan will fix you up. So Aidan Rourke lent me these ghastly breeches that were too tight. I could ride. I'd done 27 westerns by now, and I rode all right. And I'd done a bit of this in Malta somewhere, but never played properly with any good people. And they were all 10-girl handicap people. And Aidan put me on this thing called St. George. It had a muzzle and bit like a dog. Frightening animal. And I got onto this thing, and he said, you play in the first chukka and the fourth, whatever it is. Wear the green vest and play number one, and Mark Zanuck, and he's back. I don't know what the hell he's talking about. So I thought, Mark Zanuck, you know, if I make an impression on Zanuck, I'd maybe, you know. So every time Zanuck got near the ball, I'd come up on this horrible animal. And then finally, it ran away, maybe 2 or 3, it got back. For the second chuck, my knees were shaking, the brute knew this, got on it again. I thought, I must do something, I must stay with Zanuck. I was always like this. And a man called Big Boy Williams, who was a huge hitter, hit the thing the whole length of the thing, hundreds of people in the stand, including Fairbanks. And it went over our heads, Zanuck and me, and I were galloping like this, and I'm a bit behind, and I thought, if I can ride him off the ball and maybe even score, because he was the back, and getting up like this, and we were catching him, and the St. George leant forward and bit him in the bum. right through the... And I thought, you know, well, I tried to ignore this rather embarrassing action at the front end, and by now we galloped over the ball and trodden it into the ground, and there was some white mushroom top showing there, and I'd caught this going by, and I had the awful horse grabbing him by the bum, and I made a swing with my stick went underneath Zanuck's pony's tail, And the pony was very goosey and clamped its tail to its behind, and I'm strapped onto the stick, and the pony had him by the arse up that end, and this horrible triangle galloped past the stand. And Zanuck, I saw him the other day, he still talks about it. And I didn't work at 20th Century Fox for a year.
When you came, you had a spell, you left Hollywood and came back at the beginning of war, didn't you? And did your sort of war service. What was that like, first of all? Was it very difficult being a film star in the army? Did they allow you special privileges?
It was awfully tricky because that was 1939 and it was phony wartime, nothing was happening, and people being pulled out of good jobs and warm homes and all that, resenting it deeply, you know, hating the whole thing because nothing was happening. And then finding themselves in the middle of Salisbury Plain being told what to do by somebody they'd seen 2 weeks before making love to Ginger Rogers or something. They hated me, I think.
Yes.
But we muddled through. It took a long, long time.
But when you got back to Hollywood, I suppose it changed an awful lot.
Completely.
Hadn't it? I mean, it was.
Oh, yes.
It was gone, wasn't it? The sort of.
Absolutely gone. And a lot of the old names had gone. A lot of them went off and got taken over. And it changed very much. And don't forget that, for instance, all the great gangster pictures that Bogey had made just before the war, and Jimmy Cagney and all those sort of people, when Hitler unleashed, I suppose, man's greatest self-inflicted wound, wasn't it? With God knows how many million people killed. It made absolutely no sense to see gangster pictures anymore. So all that, they got down to realism finally in pictures, and away from the dream factory. And people like Marlon and Bogey had always done it, and Spencer Tracy had always done it, been absolute naturalistic actors. Really took over, and it was great, and a great improvement, really.
It somehow it left you in a couple of odd situations, though, didn't it? I mean, as far as work was concerned, from time to time. I mean, the kind of movies that you'd made your name with up until leaving Hollywood, they weren't really there, were they?
No, they hadn't. No, the sort of light comedy things.
Light comedy things. Yeah.
I mean, the experts like Carol Lombard and Bill Powell and those people know. But I was, thank God for Goldwyn. He kept me on under contract for another couple of years until I lost my head and believed my own publicity and told him to stuff it.
What was his reaction to that?
Well, he fired me immediately.
I suppose that the thing that really sort of helped you out again, though, was meeting Mike Todd, wasn't it, with the
Oh, he was marvellous.
Around the World.
Yes, marvellous man.
He is extraordinary, that man, isn't he? I mean, he's a legend in films, do you see? But he's only made one movie, didn't he?
It was the only one he made, Around the World. And he was a con man. I mean, anything... Mike, you could think of him as anything, as a great entrepreneur and a great producer or a con man. And I don't know where he got the money from, and for weeks and weeks and weeks, nobody got paid, you know. And I remember when we were in Spain, I was made deputy to go and talk to Mike and see if we could get some pesetas, you know, to buy something with. And he said, well, I understand how much you want. We worked it all out, what the boys would settle for. And his secretary was told to put on her lovely bosoms, and she was told to put on a red sweater to make it even more delectable, and stand on a certain street corner in Barcelona. And 2 taxis arrived, and men put suitcases at her feet full of pesetas, and she got another cab and brought them back. We got paid in pesetas. Same deal in Paris. We got paid in francs. And 2 or 3 times during the picture, it ground to a halt. And till funny little men arrived from Chicago and some more money. I don't know where he got it from. Nobody ever found out. And to show you how broke he was, there were so many liens against the picture when it was finished that he wasn't allowed to take it out of the state of California. So, I mean, for the costumes and things like that. And he was allowed to have it for a few hours a day to cut it. And then it was locked up by the sheriff in a safe. And finally got permission to show it in New York for the opening. And a very smart opening night. And he'd never had a sneak preview to see what it was like. A smart opening night on Broadway. And he sent me and my wife, and took us there, and flew us there, and champagne and caviar and the suite and all this. And everybody in the audience had beautiful programs, hardback programs, with their own name in gold on it, each one, individual program. And I know how broke he was, because Bennett Cerf, the publisher, produced those programs, and the check for the programs bounced. And Mike got right to the wire, and then the next day he could have borrowed $55 billion and probably did. You know?
That's extraordinary. That's the kind of nerve that I don't have.
Oh, no.
Most people, I don't.
He's a great loss.
Because in that film, too, you got a job, didn't you, for an old buddy of yours, a marvellous man who I admired tremendously, Robert Newton.
Bobby Newton.
What a marvelous...
Lovely actor.
Yeah.
But you see, Bobby's a great failing. Well, everybody knew it, so it's not telling any tales out of school. But Bobby, he liked the Mist of the Moors too, you know.
The garden.
Yes, the gargoyle. And he'd over-misted a bit, and so it was very difficult for Bobby to get employed, because he got, you know, he'd take off a bit and come back a bit late. And so we were talking about who should play the detective. I don't know if you remember the story, but Mr. Fix is the famous. So I suggested Bobby to Mike, and Mike said, great, to get him. And I said, but I have to warn you, he's an old friend of mine, but lately it's been very difficult for him, and I explained, because he, you know. So Mike said, I want to see him. I said, well, don't, please, he's my friend, don't say it. I said, but I have to warn you. So he said, won't say a word. So he said, you'll be here with me. So Bobby came in, and he was blue. He'd been out for about 3 weeks, you know. Blue face, and eyes rolling. And Mike said, ever read Around the World in 80 Days? Ooh, dear boy, ooh, lovely, ooh. And I said, have you ever heard of Jules Verne? Oh, Ween, dear boy, and ooh, lovely. Mr. Fix said, you offering me the role, dear old cock, and all this was going on. So Mike said, but your pal Niven here says you're a lush. I nearly died. And Bobby, to his undying credit, said, an understatement, dear boy. And immediately hired and took the pledge and never had a drop through the whole picture.
Of all those extraordinary people, David, that you met in Hollywood and that you wrote about in your book, which, when you look back, was the one you enjoyed most of all? The most memorable one, do you think?
I think Bogey, really. You know?
Really?
I do, honestly. He was such an extraordinary case, frightfully intelligent, you know. And a great sailor. We got together through sailing. He hated me when he first met me. He thought I was a really pissy Englishman, as he called me. and then we became bosom friends. And he actually didn't like actors much. He much preferred writers. And he couldn't stand the studio, the new group of actors, although he was very much the new group himself. He used to call them Scratch Your Ass and Belch Studio. But he was great. And what the great thing about Bogey was, you know, he was quite a physical coward, really. He had no intention of getting knocked about. He was quite small. And every day it happened. He'd go into a restaurant, somebody come, think you're so tough, Bogart, you know, and it never failed. And he had this very tough wife, not Betty. Betty's a dream. She's in London, by the way.
She is, yes.
I know.
Yes.
But he's married to Mayo Methov, who was a very rough lady. And Bogey would say, you want to make something of it, and push his wife forward, and she'd hit the man with the bottle. Wonderful.
That's one way of using a wife, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Oh, but am I being a bore?
No, of course not.
But one night, Bogey was here in London, and with Betty, and Yordis, my wife, and I, and John Huston. And we were having dinner at Les Ambassadeurs, you know, in London. And in came one of our dukes. Now, I better be careful here, hadn't I? But a very tall duke, let's put it that way. And the tall duke was not too fond of me because he'd invited me once to shoot at his place. Some partridges, poor little brutes, you know. So we were walking up some stubble in a long line of people, you know. And it was quite evident to me, having been in an outfit during the war that used carrier pigeons, that for miles a carrier pigeon was coming. You know, it's like being able to tell the silhouette of a Ford or a Rolls Royce, isn't it? They fly quite differently from a wood pigeon. And it was also quite evident to me that the Duke was going to shoot it. And some poor old man in Liverpool who let it go and was on his way to Devonport, you know. So he did. He hit it miles up there, and down it came at his feet. And everybody then realized he'd shot a carrier pigeon. And I couldn't resist it. And I said, are there any letters for me? And it was a... so I was... So I was out of the ducal department. Now I was sitting having dinner with Betty and Bogey and John Huston, and the Duke came in with a lady, and saw Betty and Bogey and was very impressed, and came over, and I introduced him. So then he had to get off. You know. So he said, when are you going to come and shoot with me again, David? And I said, well, any time. I'd love to come, and just give me a date, and I'll be there, you know. And so he said, well, the 4th week in February, how's that? It was then June, you know. So I said, I love it, I'll be there, fine. And he went off, and Bogey said, hey, get a load of you shooting with a Duke in the wood. Well, Houston said, that's not all that great a compliment. At the end of the season, it's a time when they ask a drunken local butcher and a few other people, and they go around the outside thing, they shoot the cocks only, you know. So Bogart said, the cocks only? He's mulled this over, and pretty soon somebody said something funny at our table, and Houston went like that and laughed and fell right over backwards and rolled underneath the Duke's table. And so the Duke rose from his chair and came over and said something very offensive. You and your Hollywood friends or something. And Bogart was out of the chair like a terrier. Now, the traditional thing would be to grab him like this, but the man was up there, so he grabbed him by the top fly, and he had him like this, and lifted, and the man was up, off the ground, and he said, listen to me, Duke. What do you mean, insulting my pal? Cocks only. I'm going to go to jail after this one.
No, let's send the producers to jail, David, not your eye. Did you in fact regret the passing of Hollywood, David, as it was, when you look back?
Well, I did, of course I did, because we were wonderfully spoiled, beautifully overpaid, and to do, I've always said, get up in the morning and dress up and show off playing children's games in front of the grown-ups, really. This is what acting is. I love it.
Yes.
And, of course, that has gone. The whole progression of work for actors has gone now in the movies. Yeah. I don't know how young actors get started. I don't know how they keep going anyway. No. It's absolutely, because there's none. We talked about at the beginning about those studio contract lists, there's none. No. I don't know how they do it.
What about the personal pressures, though, David, of Hollywood? Because you were separated for a while from your second wife, weren't you? While you were there in Hollywood. Is it fairly impossible, the pressures, to remain happily married there?
I think, obviously, it depends on the individual. I think that an awful lot go under, because it was so unreal. And if you read, if you're in that cocoon and in that goldfish bowl, and don't forget that at any one time in those days, even up until 1960, 65, there probably were only half a dozen people or a dozen at one time who were news. But living in Hollywood were probably 250 members of the world press waiting, for something from those people. And if they didn't get it, they'd make something up, or because they had an editor breathing down their necks, and things were being stirred all the time. It was an absolute false situation, and entirely my fault, as a matter of fact. I know that I began to take myself too seriously, and my wife, not an actress, and I must have become unbearable, and she quite rightly took off for a bit, and I had to give it a thought.
Yes. Why, in fact, did you leave Hollywood in the end, though, David? Because you now live in the south of France, don't you?
Yes.
Why did you leave?
I think it was a mixture of having made a bog of my marriage, or nearly making a bog of it, and wanting a clean break, wanting to start off again somewhere else, and also, Scots blood me, realizing that the movie business was moving to Europe,
Yes.
So the combination of the two, and itchy feet, took us off.
Yes. And since when, of course, you've had this extraordinary success with this book of yours, haven't you? The Moon's a Balloon. It's been published, a year now, and you've sold, 200,000 copies?
Well, it's ridiculous. And we ended, yesterday we had this lunch, the publisher gave me lunch. 1 year yesterday, a bestseller. Very proud of it.
It's a very readable book, actually. It's very, very funny. Do you enjoy writing it?
Well, yes. I mean, after all, if you're an actor, you're an egomaniac. And the supreme egomania is to write 130,000 words about yourself, really, isn't it?
Yes, that's true. Yes, if you looked at it like that, it might give me some inspiration. David, can I ask you just a couple of final questions? You've worked, as you said, since leaving Hollywood. I mean, you've worked all over Europe now. Have you, on location and all this sort of thing, have you ever had any sort of narrow escapes at all in that time? I mean, it's a fairly hairy occupation.
Well, I've made movies in 14 different countries since in the last 10 years, and many movies in some of them. Yes, I've had some nasty spots. John Frankenheimer nearly got me eaten by sharks in Mexico. Asked me to jump off a mast, and I said, what about the sharks? He said, there aren't any, not a shark. And I said, well, they ate 3 priests down the road last month. And he said, nothing, no sharks. And finally I did this thing. God, I came out of the water, and everybody clapped, and they thought they were very brave. 2 minutes later, this great grey beast went past. And I said, John, you son of a... Look, that shark. He said, dolphin. Yes. Sure. Then I had another horrid thing in Italy. I was doing a picture with Peter Sellers up in the mountains. And I love to ski. And it called for me to do a bit of skiing in the thing. But of course, you're not allowed to ski if you're an actor in a movie, because you break something and the whole picture's through. So the director said, I want you to, David, to turn into the camera. I didn't want to lie. I said, well, how do you turn on the ski? I've done it all my life. So he said, you don't know how to turn? I said, I didn't lie, Mike, honestly. So the next thing I knew would happen, I saw Mr. Niven, ski teacher, to teach him how to turn. It takes you about 10 years to learn how to turn. So off I went, up to the top of the mountain in my movie ski things, which were very thin, and it was unbelievably cold. It was January at Cortina, and it's high, and it was 30 below zero on top. And I went up there with this fellow, and it was, ooh, and nobody else was skiing, it was so cold. So we came down, and I was following him. We were going rather faster than I liked, really. And suddenly, I got a funny feeling that where I should have been the warmest, there was something had gone terribly wrong amidships, And the neon sign frostbite went on So I clasped my hands, here, like this, thereby putting myself into the racing position, and went past the instructor. And we get to the bottom, and I know it has happened, and I'm panicking. There were 4 mauve men there warming themselves. My Italian is very bad. I said, "Cazzo gelato!" So anyway, so they caught on. They said, "Put it in the snow." I said, "Put it in the snow." I said, "They put yours in the snow. Mine's cold enough." So then my man arrived. He said, "Alcohol, put it alcohol." So alcohol. So they put me in this terrible old taxi and drove me through the main street of Cortina, which is a very chic place, with these 4 horny-handed guides keeping circulation going. Oh, good.
I've heard of some users for alcohol, but never that before. David, can I finally ask you, what's the most extraordinary thing that you've had to do in this extraordinary life you've had? I mean, the thing when you look back at it, you think, well, my word, that took some beating. That was possibly the daftest thing I've ever done.
Well, just the other day, something pretty spooky. Lawrence Durrell, who wrote that marvelous book, My Family and Other Animals,
Yes.
And he has a zoo in Jersey. So he had a when you get a whole lot of people together.
Congregation.
Yes, convention.
Convention.
Of all the great wildlife preservationists in the world. And he had 600 of them there. And the big thing of this congress was to be the wedding of 2 gorillas. And there's a female gorilla in his zoo, and they brought from Basel in Switzerland this immense one that was going to be the husband. And he asked Yordis, my wife, and I to go and open the cage, the new gorilla cage, and asked me to be best man at the wedding of the 2 gorillas. So I thought I'd go the whole way, and I put on the full ascot, everything, great top hat, and I had a bouquet of bananas and corn. And now on this hill there, looking, the new cage is here with the 2 gorillas separated because they were going to be let go afterwards. And Yordis is waiting to pull the plug, opening the little plaque opened by Mr. and Mrs. D. Niven, that thing. And up here, the 600 very important scientists, and I'm hacking through some ghastly speech and getting laughs I never had. I couldn't believe my eyes. I wasn't trying to be funny even. They were roaring. Then I thought Yordis was doing something funny behind me. I looked round, and some ass had opened the gate, and the 2 gorillas were at it right behind me. I got a gorilla story for you.
I somehow think that's...
Can I...
Go on, please.
Could I tell you one gorilla story?
You can tell me one.
It must be the end, because I think you wouldn't want me after this.
We won't follow this one.
All right? Well, I don't think anybody will follow. Shall I try?
Of course.
Well, a man came home in his little house in the Row, and he had one palm tree in his garden. And as he walked into his house, he looked up, and there was a gorilla in the palm tree. Now, this is in Croydon or somewhere. It's a palm tree in Croydon. So he, great things up. Then he ran into his house, shut the door, and looked through the window, and it was still there. And he got the telephone directory, yellow pages, gorilla control. So he found gorilla control. And he said, "Look, I've got a gorilla in my palm tree." I said, "Please, relax. We'll get the gorilla. Don't panic. We'll be there. Give me the address. We'll be there." Right, come. Finally, a station wagon arrived, and out of it got a little man in a deer stalker with a tiny dog about this big, and a large net, and a revolver. And the man, "Come on, quick, come on here." So the little came. He said, "Please, sir, don't panic. We'll get rid of the gorilla." He said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "Well, you hold the revolver, and I'll tell you what we're going to do. I will go outside. I will climb the tree, and I will shake the gorilla to the ground. The dog, which is highly trained, will then dash forward and bite the gorilla in the bleep. This paralyzes the gorilla. Whereupon I throw the net over the gorilla, tie it up, put it in the station wagon, and take it to the zoo. He said, what do I do? He said, oh, yes, I forgot about you. You have the revolver. Well, if anything awful happens, and by mistake, I shake myself to the ground, shoot the dog.
David, all I can say to you after that is thank you very much for being my guest tonight. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you, Mike. You make it very easy. You're wonderful.
Well, till next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.